starting at 8.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. If only I would have invented Lyft or just copied Uber and beat Lyft to the market. $23 billion valuation as Lyft prepares to IPO. You going to get in on some of that action?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're wired up.
Oh, yeah, very, very heavily connected.
I don't know if Ari
of
Emanuel
cash.
has a piece of that as well. I don't know. Wanted to talk a little bit about the markets and a little bit of prospecting for 2019 growth. And to do that, we're pleased to be joined by Brian Wesbury. He's the chief economist at First Trust Portfolios. He's also economics editor for the American Spectator, contributor to Fox Business, CNBC, and Bloomberg TV. Brian, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, Amy, great to be with you.
So one of the discussions that has been ongoing for some time against the backdrop of some of the verbal sparring by Trump and Jerome Powell, mostly Trump at Jay Powell, less so Jay Powell back at Trump,
Right.
is QE, quantitative easing, had put the market on a sugar high. And so we still don't have a true market. It's still the result of easy money, loose monetary policy at the Fed. So is that really the story, or have we been on an earnings high for the last several years, and that's the story?
Yeah, this is, I think, you're hitting one of the big myths of the last 10-year economic recovery and bull market, and people will claim that all of this is just kind of we papered over the crisis with the Fed, with quantitative easing. The Federal Reserve printed $4 trillion worth of money, and that money is what boosted stocks, and it's all a sugar high. One of the things that I ask people is, do you really think Jerome Powell or Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen knows how to frack a well? Or write an app, or crack the genome, or I always, I kind of joke that they think the cloud rains on you, all right? And when we look back at the last 10 years, we have had a massive wave of new technology, and all that technology, the iPhone X means it's 10 years old. Right now, I guess it's going on 11. But it's the technology and the productivity that's created that has really boosted profits, and that's what's lifted stocks, not the Federal Reserve. And just one other quick point, and I know I'm going on, but those people who believe that all we need is to print money, that the government actually creates wealth, I think they're feeding in to this socialist movement in America, and it makes me sad because we seem to be forgetting entrepreneurship and invention, and focusing all our efforts on what's the Fed going to do, what's the government going to do, when in reality what creates wealth is private innovation.
And so, based on that argument, you would suggest probably then Chief Warren's plan to break up big tech. Not good timing for that.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't like a lot of the things that at least we hear that Google and Facebook do, especially when it comes to getting involved in deciding what's fake news and what should be allowed on what goes up on searches. I don't like a lot of that, but having government get involved, no. Absolutely not. In fact, when we go back to the crisis of 2008, sort of to set the record straight, if you will, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are two government entities or government-sponsored entities, they owned 76% of all the subprime debt. They were the biggest drivers of loans to people with low credit scores, very low down payments. Those were the loans that really went bad. The private sector got involved, but the government was the biggest part of it. Government makes huge mistakes, and when they make mistakes, everybody pays. And it's true that the private sector makes mistakes sometimes, but it never takes down the entire economy. Now, government wants us to believe that, but in reality, it's government that makes the biggest mistakes over time, in my opinion.
Well, then what do you think of the Prime Minister of New Zealand? Because she's boldly crossed the line, into censorship by dictating to Google, Instagram, and Facebook that those murderous videos must be removed or they'll be in violation of their law. Is that exceptional?
I mean, look, this is like awful stuff to talk about. Personally, I mean, this is one of the things about economics that I believe is that it needs to be value free. In other words, my personal opinion is invalid, if you will. I mean, some people like things on the internet that I would never allow my children to watch. Would want. I mean, I would want, in a sense, to ban them as well. And I don't think those videos should be up there. In a sense, that's why we have politicians. But banning a certain kind of video, if you will, especially the shooting of other people, I don't think that's the same as breaking up Facebook or right. Google. I think it's actually, in a way, trying to put certain values in society. And as an economist, I would argue that I don't even know how to say this, but that's not something that I want to analyze. It's more of a political decision, but it's not a huge economic decision. It's not going to change the economy, not allowing a certain kind of video or a certain video to be put up.
Something that could change the economy is government crowding out private investment, and at least in part, and also continuing to spend beyond means. Veronique de Rugy has a good piece on America moving toward the age of mandatory spending, and she gets into, of course, the details on the trajectory of our entitlement programs, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, $22 trillion in debt and counting. And even with a Republican president and half a Republican chamber and some compliments for the budget that was rolled out by Trump recently for the forthcoming fiscal year, even that's sort of a wistful document that doesn't get to balance budgets on an annualized basis for 15 years, which, of course, is folly. So if you are, think we're in a golden age of innovation with tech, as you were describing, is it this mandatory spending, government entitlements that most concerns you about growth and opportunity, or is it something else?
No, Dan, you hit it right on the head. That is my number one worry, and it's not a worry for today, but over the next decade, runaway spending actually it will kill this economy. I mean, the United States as a whole is not Greece yet. It's not Puerto Rico. It's not Illinois. But we're heading in that direction. Even before the Trump tax cut, we were in the 8th year of an economic recovery in 2017, and our politicians still had a $650 billion budget deficit. And we had 2 tax hikes during the Obama years, supposedly to close that deficit. And what they've proven in Washington, D.C. is they just can't stop spending. And eventually, if you keep spending, there's this new thing out there called modern monetary theory, which AOC is using as justification for spending as much as she wants, but in the end you can't. It's ridiculous. You cannot run a budget deficit, especially as large as we are, forever without paying the consequences. And we're still the most productive nation on the face of the earth, but eventually even the United States won't be able to handle that kind of debt
Now,
and that kind of spending.
Now, Larry Kudlow suggests, and he suggested the other week with Chris Wallace, look, you have to look at these projected deficits in the context of GDP growth. And so, yeah, we may be running trillion-dollar deficits, but we have a $20 trillion economy, so it's manageable, at least in the short term.
Right. In the short term, I would totally agree. If you kind of go back to the Obama years, I found myself crosswise a lot of times with some conservatives because what I said is, okay, yes, we're spending too much, we're raising taxes, we're raising regulations. I think all of those hurt growth, but on the other side, technology is so powerful that it's going to overwhelm even those policy mistakes in the near term. And I didn't believe we could have 3 or 4% growth. In fact, we called it the plow horse economy. Technology was able to beat these bad policies, but it only eked out growth, about 2% growth. Now we've cut tax rates and we've cut regulation, and we're growing a little bit faster. But eventually, so Kudlow is right in the near term, but in the long term, eventually that spending will slow down the economy. The history of man is redistribution versus wealth creation. And we can find countries, all over the world. The latest are Greece and Puerto Rico. Before that, Russia, Venezuela today, where government spending actually finally crushed the economy, and the debt burdens crushed the economy. And the United States is not immune to that. However, I would argue this is a problem for 10 years from now. It's not a problem for this year or next year or even in the next 3 or 4 years.
You put Illinois in the same category as Greece and Puerto Rico, which is appropriate. And so I wanted to ask you a question because I believe you're still an Illinois resident. The question I get all the time is, so how does this end for Illinois?
We're already in a death spiral. And the next recession, we're going to find out how bad things are. So from 2010 to 2018, United States population increased 5.8%. Illinois' population declined 0.7%. And during those same years, we increased state spending by 15%. And so just simple math tells you this can't last. You're losing population, you're losing business, you're losing revenue, and you're spending more. And now the new governor wants to raise taxes, and that's just going to chase more people and more businesses out of the state. And so we're in the death spiral. And the only thing that's allowing us to get away with it right now is that we're basically in the 10th year of economic recovery. And when you're in economic recovery, revenues do flow to the government. They get to sweep things under the rug and hide things and move money around. But once that money stops coming in other words, when we eventually have a recession, because we will at some point, that's when the problems become so massive that you can't fix them. And so I think Illinois has already started the death spiral like Greece and Puerto Rico did. It's just hard to see it right now because we've been so long into this recovery.
He is Brian Wesbury, chief economist at First Trust and econ editor for the American Spectator, contributor to Fox Business, CNBC, and Bloomberg. Brian, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much, Dan.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer.